G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you what you need to consider to give yourself the best chance of permanently fixing costochondritis. And I want to be very responsible about how I go about this because I completely understand, having treated a lot of people with costo, as to how painful and debilitating and all-consuming it can be. So what I want to do in this video is I want to first cover the potential hidden cause of your costochondritis and hopefully change your perspective about what it is, but more importantly, why it's there. And I want to help give you some exercises to hopefully help rectify those symptoms. But then we need to make sure we take a step back and have a broader conversation about what needs to go wrong in order to develop costochondritis. So again, you can have confidence you are solving this condition long term. So let's get into it. So many people end up with a diagnosis of costochondritis through a process of exclusion where they've had their heart and their chest checked out, and they don't necessarily have anything to show for it. But what's really interesting and crucial to understand if you are suffering from costochondritis is that the joint symptoms that you feel at the front are very likely a consequence of the corresponding sections at the back. And now that information can be a little bit confronting, especially if 100% of your symptoms are at the front and you don't necessarily feel anything of note around the back. Because mechanically what tends to happen is if the joints around the back become stiff, tight, and immobile in some way, then anything along the course of those ribs can be left vulnerable to succumbing to its own dysfunction. There are two more things that we're going to get to in a second, but let's go through that exercise first to see what you can find and see what impact it has on your costo symptoms. So as I've mentioned, if you are dealing with some specific areas of pain and discomfort at the front of your chest, it may sound strange that where we actually need to treat you is around the back. As if you can take a ball of some sort, I definitely recommend a softer ball like a tennis ball or something like that to begin with, especially if you feel like your costo pain is quite intense currently. And eventually we want to work towards a harder ball like a lacrosse ball, but only when you feel you have the tissue tolerance to withstand that. But as we'll get to in a second, it's really important that we do this at a level that feels inherently comfortable and safe to you to give us the space to make the biggest impact on your symptoms. So what we want to essentially do is, as I mentioned, if you know exactly whereabouts or what level your symptoms are at their worst, and you come directly around to the back and then up a little bit, we want to put the ball in those areas. So how that looks is essentially anywhere from sort of the base of your shoulder blade up to the top of your shoulder blade. If we can have the ball right in the middle on the bumps down the middle, if you can then just gently let it roll directly off to your spine and gently let the ball press into that area. Now, the reason why we want to be right next to the bumps in the middle is that's where your spinal joints are. We want to start here and then compare right versus left. The areas that we care about the most aren't the most tender, but the stiffest, the tightest, the hardest, the thickest, or the most dense. So when you compare your right side versus your left side, spend time directly letting the ball press into the areas that feel the most restricted. And then what I want you to do is, after 30 seconds or a minute, systematically work your way up a little bit or down a little bit. Just look for every single joint in that area for clues as to where those hidden handbrakes might be around the back. Once you've done that, we then want you to respectfully move out to the side a little bit more, kind of in between your shoulder blade and your spine down the middle, because these areas are going to be the ribs. Pressure on these spots may be more tender, but ultimately we're looking for the same symptoms of feeling harder, stiffer, tighter, and more restricted. As a quick hack, it's most likely going to be all on the same side. It doesn't necessarily change from side to side whether you're going through the spinal joints or the rib joints, but back your instincts in, get a sense of what feels stiff and tight all the way up and down that rib cage, and spend as much time as you need to respectfully encouraging that tissue to release. So just on that alone, please let me know in the comments down below what the ball technique did for you. But ultimately, it is just a symptomatic treatment. So let's now talk about the role of stress and its effect on your nervous system and its ultimate impact on costochondritis. So once you've hopefully found the potential hidden connection between your symptoms at the front and that dysfunction around the back, it's really important that we need to understand what pain means for you. Because one of the hallmarks, unfortunately, of costochondritis is really intense, severe, and persistent pain at the front of your chest. And as I try and talk about a lot on this channel, if you don't understand what pain represents, then it's hard to nail this completely. And what pain is a relatively interesting topic of conversation, because for years, we've made people feel that the reason why pain exists is because tissue is damaged. That maybe one of your ribs is out of place, maybe there's some damage at the front of your chest, which prompts pain. And while this can potentially be the case for a small group of people, pain doesn't just represent tissue damage. And the reason for this is that all pain represents for anyone is just your brain and nervous system's perception of threat. Now that can obviously encompass damage and injury, but in the absence of damage and injury, it just represents how threatened your brain feels. And the reason why this is just so important to understand is that your pain experience is heavily affected by everything else that goes on in your life in terms of how stressful and threatening those things are. For example, if you are someone who has a lot of relationship stress, work stress, financial stress, cultural stress, religious stress, perhaps you've been a victim of abuse of some sort, those experiences can leave an indelible mark on your nervous system, asking it to heighten. And the body's fight or flight response is a very natural, normal response to threatening and stressful situations. But the only difference is that a lot of the threatening, stressful situations that we're exposed to as modern humans aren't fleeting. They're consistent, they're constant, they're often just a part of our lives. And what this means is if you can take a step back and consider that there are situations in your day-to-day life or in your past that your body feels inherently threatened and stressed by, then you might find that your body's fight or flight response is constantly up. But if you never get to the stage where you're out of that heightened state and your nervous system is constantly heightened and threatened, then your body may not have the environment necessary to give your brain permission to calm down, settle down, and decrease your pain. While costochondritis is often a mechanical compensation for dysfunction around the back, it's also heavily influenced by how threatened and stressed your nervous system is before you even got to that point. And as I mentioned, if we're giving you something to mobilize those handbrakes and improve the function of your rib cage again, to hopefully give permission for those symptoms to go away, if we're not also giving you something to down-regulate that nervous system at the same time, then we may be missing a crucial piece of that pain puzzle. And while it's often unrealistic for people to click their fingers and remove those stressful situations, but what you do have control over is how your body reacts to that stimulus. So the next thing I want to touch on is I want to show you a very simple deep breathing exercise that you can do straight away that will instantly down-regulate a heightened nervous system to some degree. So in order to give your nervous system a chance to down-regulate as optimally as possible, we want to make sure that while we're doing this deep breathing exercise that you feel comfortable, because all we want to get you to do is we want to get you to take some deep breaths in through your nose with a pause at the top before fully exhaling all the way out through pursed lips. And essentially how that looks, pause at the top, and then breathe all the way out through pursed lips. What this does is this prompts your nervous system to relax. You might find that the cadence that you breathe at is different for each person, but just do what feels comfortable. If you can consistently repeat this for 10 times, you should instantly feel less heightened, more calmer, less stressed than what you did initially. If before you do this exercise, you close your eyes and give yourself a number out of 10 as to how heightened you feel, with again 10 being the most stressed, anxious, and on edge you've ever felt, 0 being the most relaxed and safe you've ever felt. Give yourself a number between those two figures that best represents how you feel at the moment. Then cycle through 10 slow, deep breaths and then recheck in again to see what number you come up with. And again, let me know in the comments down below what number you started with and then what number you ended at, despite just taking 10 simple deep breaths. Because the way to structure this is if you do find that taking those simple deep breaths does help you de-escalate and that it does have an immediate impact on how bad your pain feels, then it's really important that you do your deep breathing consistently throughout the day. Not just when you feel symptomatic and heightened, but to do it consistently enough that you're getting ahead of those symptoms and chipping away at how heightened your nervous system feels so it never ends up at an 8, a 9, or a 10 out of 10. So if you can pair up the mechanical mobilizations of those hidden restrictions in your back and coming at your nervous system to down-regulate it so it doesn't feel as heightened and as threatened, then you're setting the conditions for those symptoms to go away as quickly as your body and your environment is going to let it. Because once you've done those things, we also need to now have a conversation about why those symptoms are there in the first place. What is it about your day-to-day life that has asked those exact parts of your back to become irritated, annoyed, and dysfunctional, and given something for that heightened nervous system to pick on? So clinically as a physiotherapist, what I've come to understand is that when trying to better understand why you've developed some specific dysfunction in a part of your trunk, it pays to pay attention to the shapes and the postures that you put that tissue into the most throughout the day. And classically, we often think about things like lifting positions, moving, doing things with our spine. But again, clinically, often the biggest root underlying cause of that dysfunction are the stationary shapes that we get into the most. So if you have found that by putting a ball into your back, you've located the potential hidden cause and the origin of those symptoms around the front, then there has to be a shape and a posture that you're getting into that's consistently loading up that tissue, asking it to become stiff, tight, and dysfunctional in the first place. And for most people, that can be something as simple as sitting at your computer, using a laptop, using a phone, playing an instrument, sitting into your couch, relaxing, certain posture that you get into in the car. If you're someone who doesn't sit very often, but stands and bends over a lot, whether you're a physiotherapist or you're a chef or anything like that, then those shapes and postures should be very high on your list of suspects as to what might be causing this in the first place. And one of the mysteries around costo is that most people don't get costo until they get costo. It's not as common that someone has an incident or an accident that damages their tissue then and there. That obviously can happen. But for the majority of people that I've seen at least, it's just something that develops out of nowhere. And the best way to think of this is it's not the start of something new, but it's a death by 1,000 cuts that's built up and built up and built up. And the moment that you've noticed your pain is the moment you've breached the threshold that something about that experience in your environment, your body is no longer tolerating. Mix that in with any stress or challenges that you experience outside of this setting, then we have a recipe for those symptoms to be there. But as I mentioned, any stress or any underlying trauma that you experience still needs something to pick on underneath. So if you aren't taking the time and fostering the awareness to improve your postures and shapes to better load up those areas, then again, it may be unrealistic for you to expect that the work that you're putting into that tissue will be permanent. And often it's just as simple as being up taller, shoulders comfortably back, and then fitting your environment around that particular shape to support you in this position and not consistently drag you out of that shape and put tension through those exact parts of your body. So with that being said, I genuinely hope that those tips were helpful. Please let me know in the comments down below how each one of those tips may have resonated with you or not. If you did find that this was helpful and you're looking for more information that you can sink your teeth into, I have developed a costochondritis course. It's based on my clinical experience treating people with costochondritis. I'll leave a link in the description with a discount code attached. Ultimately, if you did find this helpful and insightful, please consider leaving a like rating on the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you want more information like this. I hope to see you next time.